Good morning. Today is Tu B'Shvat, the 15th day of Shvat, and it's also the 5th day of February, or the 4th? It's the 5th, I think. 6th? 6th of February. And we are starting a new mimer, a new essay, from the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe. This is in his book of essays from 5647, which translates into 1887. And this is the mimer in Parshas Jethro. Okay, so we're going to start. Page Ein Bet, page 72. וישמע יתרו כהן מדן חותן משה את כל אשר עשה אלוקים למשה עבדו לישראל עמו אשר הוציא השם את ישראל וכולו. So Jethro heard. Who was Jethro? The priest of Midian, the father-in-law of Moshe, all that God had done for Moshe, his servant, and for Israel, his people, that God took them out of Egypt. And it says, "Ve'ita b'midrash b'mkomo yeter kshu nochri, u'mishenitger usifu lo ot b'shmo v'nikra Yitro." When he was a non-Jew, his name was Jethro, Yeter. And then when he converted to Judaism, they added a letter to his name, a vav, and he became Jethro, Yitro. So that we have to understand, why did they add this letter? Why did they change his name? Okay, but this is a foundation for all converts, that they change their names. But we see that here all he needed to do was change one letter.
Where did you get that letter from?
Well, that's what we'll see. We also need to understand, why does it describe him as the priest of Midian, the father-in-law of Moshe? These are two opposites. The priest of Midian means that he was the head of idolatry in his country. And that he's the father-in-law of Moshe means that he's connected to monotheism. So how did this even work together? It should have been that his name, he should have just been called the father-in-law of Moshe. Why does it mention him as the priest of Midian? What do we gain from knowing that he was the priest of Midian? The Zohar, at the beginning of our Parsha, Daf Samech Zayin Amud Bet, folio 67, side 2, and folio 68, side 1. It says, by Jethro acknowledging and saying, now I know, ki gadol havaya, that God havaya is great. What is he great? He's greater than all the Elokim, all the gods, as it were. Kedein istalek v'ityaker kuchabrichu ila vatata ulavatar yahi voraita. So then God's honor, or God's the respect for God, for the kuchabrichu, which is za, specifically for God as he is the measures of the heart, the attributes of the heart, it went up, and then the Torah could be given. So that's what the Zohar says. So the Zohar very clearly says that without Jethro converting and acknowledging God, the conversion is basically an acknowledgement that God is God. So without that, the Torah could not have been given. ולכאורה, משמע מהזוהר, דעניין מתן תורה על ידי שהודע יתרו דווקא. ולכאורה זהו פלא. And this is wondrous. וכי הודעת יתרו חשיב יותר מ-60 רבון נשמות ישראל שיצאו ממצרים ויאמינו בהשם ושרו שירה לפניו יתברך. Could it be that the conversion of one man is greater than the fact that 600,000 males came out of Egypt? And here he stresses, they believed in God and sang a song, the song at the sea. No one had sung a song for God before the song at the sea. There's no mention in the Torah of anybody ever singing a song for God. There are songs, but not for God. Can that conversion of one individual be more important than this tremendous feat? Why would it be that before the giving of the Torah, there first needs to be the acknowledgement or the conversion of Jethro?
Who says it was more important?
Because he says that the Torah could not be given without it. So it's a necessary condition. It's not. Sorry, it's a. So you're saying it's a necessary, but maybe it's not sufficient.
No, maybe it's one more thing.
So you're saying it's necessary and it's not sufficient. But still, this was the thing that was waiting. Hashem couldn't have given the Torah after they crossed. They sang the song at the sea. That should have been enough. Hachayinyanu. So now the Rebbe Rashab begins to explain this, and the beginning of the explanation is many things that we already know very well. There's nothing new here, but it's a good repetition or a good summary review of the basic premises of how Chasidus, how the Alter Rebbe sees the structure of our psyche. So he begins by quoting a verse from Ecclesiastes, from chapter 2. And in this verse it says, and I, says Kohelet, the author of Ecclesiastes, Ra'iti, I've seen that there is benefit to wisdom above foolery, or not exactly foolery, not nonsense, over being a boor. Being a boor is a person who doesn't know anything, the uneducated. That there's wisdom above, I can't remember what the word is. Just as light has a benefit over darkness. So clearly, if a person is wise, it's better than being uneducated. It's better than having no wisdom.
The same thing with Ruth. Until Ruth became a convert, so Mashiach couldn't come because she was the great-grandmother of David. Maybe it was also necessary.
And in the Zohar, he questions very clearly, Kohelet has to tell us this, Ecclesiastes has to tell us this great truth. Doesn't the rest of the world also know this? Even a person who has no wisdom at all. Min yomei velo ashgach ba yadahai sheshitron chochma min hasichlut, who has no wisdom from the beginning of his days, who doesn't know anything, he still knows that the wise person is better off than the person who has no education. There's nothing special about this statement. It's a given. It's a well-known fact. Va'inyan. Okay, so from this is really the answer to all the questions. This verse, the way he's going to explain this verse, is the answer to all the questions that he asked above about Jethro. Why did they add the letter Vav to him? Why did he first need to come for the Torah to be given? And now he begins to explain. Va'inyan. The issue with this verse is like this. Di'inei k'tiv kiner mitzvah v'torah or. It says that the mitzvah is like a candle and Torah is like a light. Shamitzvah nikret ner. The mitzvah is called a candle. How do we know that the Torah is called light? Because it says that God wears light like a dress, like a garment. And what it means, it's referring there to the light of the Torah. I mean, the light is a revelation of godliness, but it's in the sense of a garment that God wears. Obviously, it's a symbol or a metaphor that we need to understand a little bit better. But right now, we'll just leave it at that. The soul itself is also called a candle, not just a mitzvah, not just a commandment. The candle of God, it says in Psalms, is the soul of man. Actually, I don't think it's Psalms. I think it's Proverbs. Now, why is the soul called the candle? Now, to understand this metaphor, why the soul is called the candle, he gets into the whole review of how Chasidus works. And he says like this. That you should love God with all of your heart means that you should love Him with both your good inclination and your evil inclination, with both of them. That you need to transform the evil inclination, the negative inclination, into something positive. And not just something positive, it needs to become godly. That's a pretty big transformation. Every Jew has, every Israelite has two souls, as it were, or two animas. The divine anima and the animalistic anima, which is basically saying the same thing twice, because anima means an animal. Animalistic comes from anima anyway. Nefesh Elokit, the divine soul, is a part of God above. What? Anima. It's what animates something. It's a nefesh. Nefesh is anima. Yeah, that's because you're a pharmacist, and you learned pharmacy.
Too much.
And you still do that. So, the divine soul is a part of God above. And it always has a yearning and a love that draws it towards godliness. So the soul can be described like a candle, like a flame. And the flame is forever yearning above. It's always going up. It never really goes down. You can play with it, but in principle it would always return to its natural state and want to go up. So that's why the soul, specifically the divine soul, is likened to a candle, because it's constantly yearning to go up, just like the flame on a candle. But the animal soul in a Jew is from the good part. It doesn't say here the good part, but that's what it says in the Tanya, of the klipas noga, of the intermediary husk of impurity. And we've talked about all these things so many times. And each one of these souls is composed of an intellect and attributes. Intellect meaning the mind, the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding that it has. And attributes meaning the attributes of the heart, feelings, emotions, character traits. The more important part in both of them is the mindset, is the mind itself, the intellect. And once it matures, then attributes are born out of the mind. That's what it's very interesting. I was talking to a bacher in Chabad. He didn't know this. He didn't understand this thing, which is the whole premise of the Tanya. That you have certain attributes in you, a certain character, and from your divine soul, you're supposed to give birth to a new set of attributes. You didn't know this. It's like, how can you learn Tanya and not know? This is the very, very basis of all Chasidus. What kind of transformation are we talking about? We're talking about the first stages, that out of your divine soul, out of the intellect of the divine soul, which means out of the Torah that you learn, literally that's what the intellect of the divine soul is, it's the Torah that you learn. From that you come to create a new character. And so if naturally...
A new character?
A new character. New character. You don't better yourself. It's a new character. It's a completely different set of attributes. That's why people feel that they have two separate selves. You can't explain the person psychologically without at least two separate sets of characteristics. And people are lost because of that. They don't know, so who am I? Right? Which one am I? You're both. Your natural self is self-serving. All your attributes, your character traits are all self-serving. And even if you're altruistic, naturally, it's still self-serving. It's not meant to be truly altruistic. So if a person by nature has a good nature and he likes to help other people, it's not because he's truly altruistic and he's thought it through and he thinks that this is what I need to do. It's self-serving. How is it self-serving? In many ways, but usually the regular explanation is that he's built in such a way that his chemistry makes him feel good when he does something good. Or if he's thought it through a little bit, then he comes to the conclusion, I'd rather live in a society where people are nice to each other and kind and helpful than to live in a society where they're not. So that's that. But when you learn Torah, but first of all, not everyone is like that. Very few people are like that. Most people grow up with a nature which is explicitly self-serving. You see that, and everything that goes with that. So that's the natural self. That's what it is. That's the animal soul. That's the animal soul's attributes, the character traits. That's how you are when you grow up. And you're basically like an animal in the sense that there's no knowledge that needs to be introduced for you to become that person. You'll become that person anyway, whether you go to school or you don't go to school. It'll only actually make it stronger when you go to school, because those thoughts that you had when you come to interact with other people, they create your character. The interactions with the other people, that's what fashions and what molds the character in practice. But the Torah has a different idea, and it says you should give tzedakah. And it doesn't say you should give tzedakah so that you should get more yourself. That may be true, but that's not the reason why you give tzedakah. You give tzedakah because God told you to. And that's to build a character which is secondary, like the Tanya says, the nefesh hashenit b'Yisrael, the secondary soul, or the second soul. Because it's not the first one, it's not the one we grew up with.
But second doesn't necessarily mean secondary.
It does, because that's exactly the whole point that he explains in chapters 13, 14, 15. That because we've lived with our natural soul for so many years before we started learning Torah, and before we started ingraining Torah into ourselves and these principles, making them ours, so because of that, it's a secondary soul, because it's coming to usurp, it's trying to grab and take over the self, how the person sees himself. Okay? And it's not always successful, because people are very troubled, because they say, I learned so much Torah, why have I not changed? It says, for you to be able to change your natural self is much more than just learning Torah. It's a big battle. And that's actually what he's talking about. That the purpose is to transform the animal soul's attributes into something godly. Even they can become godly. If they're on, and we talked about this a lot when we talked about the Ayeka from the Alter Rebbe, that for this process, how do you explain to the animal soul why it should cling to godliness also? That is what the Alter Rebbe needed, an approbation from heaven when he was in prison the first time. Remember that sikha that we learned from the Rebbe, which is a very powerful sikha, very central sikha to the whole thought of this generation. That you need an approbation to be able to transform the animal soul, to speak to it in the right language, words that will really transform it in a complete way into something that serves and is subservient to godliness. Okay, let's just finish this up quickly. This first paragraph. אף שהעיקר השכל הוא המולידה, מכל מקום, קודם שנגלה מהות מידה, אי אפשר לומר על זה שום ציור עדיין מפני שהוא בהיעלם במוחו עדיין. So, the mind of the divine soul is constantly thinking about godliness. This can only really come to pass if a person is studying Torah. If he doesn't study Torah and he's not contemplating godliness, then the divine soul is famished. It's near starvation, or it might be starved. He could be, a very nice person, but he has nothing to do with godliness. He doesn't think for a moment about what is beyond the self, what is beyond my current existence, right? What is the infinite? Because I'm not infinite, I'm finite. Sometimes I can think about the infinite. I can think about the infinite in mathematics, and that's good, but that's not yet Torah. That's not something infinite in mathematics will not change your attributes, the attributes of the animal soul. You have to think about Torah in order to have thoughts about the infinite, meaning about God. You have to pray, you have to stand every day in prayer before the infinite to have a relationship with it. Otherwise, you're only talking about it, at best, and you're not even talking about it. You're actually not even approaching it. So, everything that is in the intellect is only what he says a potential. And it has to come down into the attributes of the heart to become something that is fulfilled, that has some, he calls it here a tziyur, that has some shape, it has some form. Until you've acted upon it, it doesn't have a form, it's just a point, as it were. So this is the idea that everything that's in the intellect, it could be emotions in the intellect, but they're a point. They don't draw out, they don't become a full form, something that the person can actually experience and feel and can become character. when we talk about character, it's very interesting. Character is also how the character traits of a person are, like what type of person he is. But character is also like a figure, right? So the figure is drawn out like a character, like an A, B, C, D. These are all characters, right? And character is also your ofi, like what kind of person you are, because it's drawn out, right? In the same way that when I say ant, so the A there is just in a point. It's not yet drawn out. It's only when I actually write it out that I see the A there. The person who doesn't understand English may not even notice that I did an A, like little kids before they know how to read and write, so they don't know how you construct the ant. They only hear it and they mimic the words, the sounds. But they don't know how it's written, because it takes time to draw it out, to bring it out and make it into shape, into a form. But then when it becomes something in the heart, when it's expressed in the heart, this knowledge that you had in your intellect, then it's called a character. And that's why the attributes of the divine soul are called the good inclination. Okay, so we'll have to end here, and we'll continue tomorrow.